Hi, good morning and good bless. This is Jazel Q de la Cruz, student from North Central Mindanao College, taking a Bachelor in Secondary Education, major in Science. And good morning and good bless to my instructor, Mr. Edgar Arnoco. So today, I will going to report the components and functions of the cell membrane. Let us first start with the objectives. First, to understand the importance of cell membrane, to learn the structure of the cell membrane. Next is to identify the components of the cell membrane and to explain the different function of the major components such as the proteins, the lipids, and the carbohydrates. So let us start with the cell membrane. So the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, or also called the cytoplasmic membrane, is a biological membrane that separates the interior of a cell from its outside environment. So basically, its primary function is to protect the cell from its surroundings. So it also provides a fixed environment inside the cell, and also it has different functions. So first is to transport nutrients into the cell and to transport toxic substances out of the cell. So that is the function of the cell membrane. So there are three components, or the major components of the cell membrane, which are the lipids, the proteins, and the carbohydrates. So next one, let's go with the parts of the cell membrane. So this is the cell, the extracellular fluid, the nucleus, and the cytoplasm. So here, the red one here, it is the cell membrane. So the parts of the cell membrane. So we have here the carbohydrate, the glycoprotein, the globular protein, the protein channel or the transport protein, the cholesterol, the glycolipid, the surface protein or the globular protein integral, the filaments of cytoskeleton, the alpha helix protein, and the peripheral protein. And also we have here the phospholipid bilayer, as you can see, and the phospholipid, we have the hydrophilic head and the hydrophobic tail. So that is the parts. So next one, so the cell membrane, it is composed of lipids, specifically phospholipids and cholesterol. Proteins, also proteins, so that provide a barrier between the external environment and the cell. So it regulates the transportation of molecules across the membrane and communicate with other cells via protein receptors and carbohydrate groups. Lastly, carbohydrate groups that are attached to some of the lipids and proteins. So the cell membrane is primarily composed of a mix of proteins and lipids. So depending on the membrane's location and role in the body, lipids can make up anywhere from 20 to 80% of the membrane. So 20 to 80% of the membranes are lipids, and the remaining percent, or the remainder of that, is proteins. So while lipids help to give membranes their flexibility, so proteins monitor and maintain the cell's chemical climate and assist in the transfer of molecules across the membrane. So that is the role of lipids and proteins. So we have here the cell membrane lipids. This is the phospholipid bilayer, as you can see. So the next one is the phospholipids. So this is the diagram or the picture of the phospholipids. So phospholipids are a major component of a cell membrane. So under siya sa lipids. So phospholipids form a lipid bilayer in which they are hydrophilic or hydrophobic. Or hydrophilic is they are attracted to water. Hydrophobic is they repel the water or repelled by water. So the hydrophilic is the head area, and the hydrophobic is the tail. So as you can see the picture, so mo na siya. So the circle or the upper one or the hydrophilic head, mo na siyang head, and this is the tail, which is the hydrophobic. So the hydrophobic consists of the saturated fatty acids and the unsaturated fatty acids. So the lipid bilayer is semi-permeable, and they are well suited for this role because they are amphipathic. So meaning that they have both hydrophilic and hydrophobic regions, which allows certain molecules to diffuse across the membrane. So again, the phospholipid tail, which consists of the hydrophobic tail. So it has saturated fatty acids and the unsaturated fatty acids, which is under the membrane fluidity. So what is membrane fluidity? So it is a dynamic structure that allows the movement of the phospholipids and proteins. So fluidity is a term actually used to describe the ease of movement of the molecules in the membrane, and is an important characteristic for a cell function. So saturated fatty acids have no double bonds, are saturated with hydrogens, so they are relatively straight. So as you can see the picture, the saturated fatty acid, the tail is straight. So unsaturated fatty acids, on the other hand, contain one or more double bonds, often resulting in a bend or kink. So next one is the cholesterol. Cholesterol molecules, by the way, cholesterol is another lipid component which is for the animal cell membrane. So cholesterol molecules are selectively dispersed between membrane phospholipids. So this helps to keep cell membranes from becoming stiff by preventing phospholipids from being too closely packed together. So cholesterol is not found in the membrane of plant cells, for an additional information. So next one is the glycolipids. So they are located on cell membrane surfaces and have carbohydrate sugar chain attached to them. So they help the cell to recognize the cells of the body. So that is the role of the glycolipids. So next one is the cell membrane proteins. So ganina, it is the cell membrane lipids. So this one next is the cell membrane proteins. So there are two types of cell membrane proteins. We have the peripheral membrane proteins and the integral membrane proteins. So what is peripheral proteins? So peripheral proteins are the exterior to and connected to the membrane by interactions with other proteins. So muna siya ang peripheral proteins. Muna ang ihang structure sa peripheral proteins. So next one is the integral membrane proteins. They are inserted into the membrane and most pass through the membrane. So portions of these transmembrane proteins are exposed on both sides of the membrane, sa outside and the inside. So cell membrane proteins have several different functions as well. So before we proceed to the different function of cell membrane proteins, this is the structure of the integral proteins. So they have access to the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. They are exposed to both sides. So the several functions of cell membrane proteins, first is the structural proteins, where it helps to give the cell support and shape. So from the word structure, so they help support the shape of the cell. So this is the structure of the cell. So next one is the under the several functions is the cell membrane receptor proteins. So it helps the cell communicate with their external environment through the use of hormones, neurotransmitters, and other signaling molecules. So this is the cell receptor. So they communicate with the external environment with the use of hormones. That is the role of, or that is the function of the receptor. So next one is the transport proteins, such as globular proteins transport molecules across cell membranes through facilitated diffusion. So this is the classes of transport proteins: the channels, which is the single file, transporters, one at a time, and ATPase pumps, or the active transport. So muna siya. So next one is the glycoproteins. Glycoproteins have carbohydrate chain attached to them. They are embedded in the cell membrane and help in cell-to-cell communications and molecule transport across the membrane. So this one here, so makita nato ang glycolipids, globular proteins, the carbohydrates, the channel proteins, which is katon transport proteins, the integral protein, the peripheral proteins, so muna siya, and the cholesterol, and we have here the glycoproteins. So next one is the carbohydrates, which is, this is the carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the third major component of plasma membrane. So in general, they are found on the outside surface of cells and are bound either to proteins forming glycoproteins or to lipids forming glycolipids. So these carbohydrate chains may consist of 2 to 6 monosaccharide units and can be either straight or branched. So along with the proteins, these carbohydrates form distinctive cellular markers, sort of like molecular ID badges that allow cells to recognize each other. So these markers are actually very important in the immune system because it allows the immune cells to differentiate between body cells. They will differentiate body cells in which they should not attack, which is those cells are good for the immune system, and also they actually recognize foreign cells or tissues which they should attack that is harmful in the immune system. So that is all for the major components and the functions of the cell membrane. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you and God bless.